Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for nearly 12 years now, and I work within the knowledge and practice part of the organisation, looking at the effect of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 members working worldwide right across the property life cycle, all the way from land, planning and development, construction, brokerage, finance, building, property management, it really is an incredibly broad canvas upon which data and technology is having a very profound and important impact. And indeed, our members work across all the different asset types, land itself, but residential, commercial, alternative and infrastructure. So an incredibly important area for us to understand really what's going on in this sector and how that's going to impact the profession. And I'm really glad to have Stephen back from Proptech Connection to talk to us today too. So Stephen, please do join us on the call.
Hi there, Andrew.
Hi, Stephen. Glad to get you back on the call again. And for those who didn't see our last conversation, which I think is over a year ago now, it'd be great to hear a bit about your background and the origin story and what Proptech Connection does.
Sure. I'm currently based in Sydney, but hopefully you can detect still from my accent. I'm originally from Scotland. In terms of background, post PwC went into clean tech. So working for a major VC fund in the UK investing in clean tech, which at the time, being 2006, 2005, was primarily focused on solar, wave, wind, and a bit of dynamic building materials. Came over to Australia about 10 years, or a bit longer than that, 12 years ago, worked for a major REIT and supported the Cap Trans team, and then headed up the data analytics function for the residential division. So 3,000 apartments a year, but they were quite unique in terms of an integrated developer. Got back into VC, worked for one of the major VC funds here, one of the Proptech funds, and then set up with our partner in the US, Evo, the Proptech Connection. So in terms of what we do, we help every actor within the ecosystem. So if you focus on tech buyers, as we call them, primarily real estate companies, we help guide them through that adoption process. We have over 16,000 companies within our research platform that we've built. And what we saw in market was this difficulty in actually navigating such a big system. And there's many issues that we'll maybe come on to, but if you look at something like build to rent or hotels or build to sell, you're starting to see that amalgamation of the techs actually jump sectors. People previously were actually finding it very difficult to get sectors out, technologies out with the core sector, if you like, but also getting that global visibility. So what we do is we help real estate companies in that adoption process, let them know what trends are happening in different markets. We have offices in Bangkok, Chicago, Amsterdam, and Sydney, soon to have one coming very soon in another major region. So that's on the real estate side. On the investor side, we started to see a lot of CVCs come into market. Again, similar problems to the real estate companies in terms of getting that global visibility of deals. And actually what you saw was a pretty poor situation where the CVCs were actually potentially getting second tier or first rejected deals. So the techs would go to the kind of well-branded funds and not actually get to the CVC. So we help do that benchmarking using our proprietary research insights platform. But we also get them access to deals from far-flung places based on the commercial use case. And then just to round out from the PropTechs, obviously, given our network of real estate companies and investors, we help them advise, but also introduce as well.
That's great. And you've obviously had and continue to have a hugely kind of privileged, if I can use that word, view of the sector and how it's emerging. And I suppose it's a cliche to talk about how, amazing in different ways of that particular word the last few years have been. But I'm really interested to hear your kind of sense of over that last 2-3 years of the pandemic, what's adoption felt like? What have been the drivers, the barriers, and have any particular new technologies emerged in that time?
Yeah, I think you're starting to see a transition away from, and if you look at something like the Gartner hype cycle, there was a lot of love for technology and its potential capabilities, but you're now starting to see a much more, I would arguably say, astute perception of what technology is for. And you're starting to see text, and you're starting to see then it's kind of split within the tech ecosystem of UIs or UXs that are just add-ons to potentially mainstream systems like MRI or whatever, where the value may be less to things that actually fundamentally change how you do business from an automation or workflow perspective. And I think you're starting to see definitely from an investment point of view, the push towards that, and then maybe the kind of pushing down, if you like, of those kind of less value adds. So you're definitely seeing a much more sensitive need for ROI in terms of tech. There's also an awareness now, I would say, in terms of that tech won't solve all problems. If you look at CMBS potential defaults coming up, if you look at WACC for construction or development projects, having 3 or 4 techs won't solve that, but it will actually solve other issues like security, risk mitigation, how you repurpose buildings, or how you stratify your asset portfolio, whatever it may be. So I think the techs are able to articulate that and demonstrate that quite clearly, both from an investment and adoption view, are doing a lot better than where I think 3 or 5 years ago it was still everyone was kind of figuring stuff out.
So, I mean, you've talked there on that sort of focus moving forward on ROI, which certainly reflects a lot of the conversations I've had. I mean, in terms of perhaps additional drivers looking forward from 2023 and beyond, and other barriers, and indeed, it's hard to have a conversation now without talking about generative AI. I mean, do you see things on the horizon that are going to shake things up yet again?
Our big focus at the moment is things that give surety, accuracy, and able to deliver flexible buildings. And what we have this concept of space repurposing or asset utilization. And I talked about it earlier in terms of how the sector demarcation has actually been blurred. And I think you're particularly, obviously commercial, but also in terms of affordability issues around residential, you're going to, where the techs are going to lead in the future is being able to, whether that's design or manipulate post these buildings into multi-purpose, repurposing these buildings. And it's funny, because if you look at kind of how some of the major cities have evolved, you've got this concept of CBD and then kind of outer rings. I think you'll actually see tech enabling kind of that neighborhood environment, which you'll then need kind of connectivity for different mini CBDs and mini residential suburbs, and tech will be a driver of that as well. So I think that kind of interconnectivity piece as well, driven by those factors I said, will be crucial.
Yeah, I think, as you say, that there is some fundamental sort of reshaping of the way we use real estate, isn't it, in that way, and that connectivity both between assets and indeed how an individual asset might be used. Now, all of this obviously all requires data, and that data to be of good quality and availability. Have you seen an improvement in that ability for the sector to curate and share and have better quality data that tech can sit on top of?
I think it depends where in the life cycle you look at. I think from an asset management point of view, definitely. I think there's much stronger data governance from the major REITs, for example, which then drives decent insights, even base level AI or decision-making tools. I think the challenge you have is a lot of advisory services still sit in the middle of transactions, and the connectivity of those data sets make it hard to see things at a city, state, country level, because there's maybe 6 or 7 groups that have their own data sets. And I think that's the challenge if you're trying to make and it's interesting because you're starting to see more arbitrary decisions around where you put commercial or where you locate your office. Previously, it was obviously main areas, where actually now a lot of people are looking at walkability scores and cost per square meter, which is actually agnostic to CBDs. So you actually need that cohesive data set to make those decisions, and I think that's still a bit of an area of challenge, although a lot of techs are trying to solve.
Yeah, as you say, that kind of that move to a more kind of locational driven data set that's overlaying those other kind of factors, which I suppose people instinctively are valuing, but you need that harder data. Now, obviously, with the economic backdrop of the huge in relative terms increase in interest rates and the effect on future valuations, what are your thoughts on consolidation through M&A and dare I say it, failures within the Proptech sector? Because clearly the tech sector more broadly has seen a huge change in valuations, and are you seeing that floating down into the Proptech ecosystem as well?
From a valuation point of view, you are definitely seeing haircuts being taken in market. I think from a tech adoption point of view, it's quite interesting actually, because you've obviously got this ESG overlay as well, which is a cost. And to actually meet a lot of demand, you actually have to sacrifice your ESG commitments, and you're actually seeing a number of companies come away from the commitments they've made. So what you're starting to see in market, and I think we've identified 5 strategies that some are doing, but it's kind of product differentiation. It's we're going to be a cost provider of space. We're going to be known as the smart building guys, or we're going to be known as the ESG team. Or what, and that's not the, I can't remember offhand what they are, but there's a number of strategies, and you're starting to see people pivot in terms of their tech adoption, in terms of doing that. I think what's really interesting is where you see the American market going. Now, you look at Brookfield, you look at RXR, you look at BlackRock and its fund, the #1 retail area in the US, the #1 retail center in the US, I think also defaulted on a loan as well, multifamily in San Fran. So you're actually, from a Proptech point of view, yes, there's going to be challenges in terms of some might say that's one of the things we'll cut. But I actually think you're going to see this real fundamental change in how you utilize real estate in general. And I think to actually make that transition, digital strategies will be at the core. So the really good tech, so we'll take that forward.
Yeah, and certainly anecdotally, I've heard comments, and there was some statistics I saw quoted in The Economist about, the increase of allocation of funds into, so-called climate tech, which obviously is beyond just real estate, but there certainly seems to be an appetite there to channel funds there. I mean, how would you summarize the current investor view at the moment? You've talked about that focus on the fundamental change of real estate. There's obviously still an appetite to invest in technology. There's still almost an unmet need by the sounds of it, given the challenges of the way we're going to work with real estate in the future.
Yeah, I think that there definitely is, and I think the techs that drive the biggest data sets, and you saw today, and I can't remember who it is. There was a data set vertical provider that had a very good valuation from one of the leading funds in the US. What that basically means is if you look at ChatGPT or one of the AI query search tools, the one that wins that race is the one that has the best level of relevance of query. And the way you do that is through strong data sets. So if you're a prop tech that's able to generate very robust insights and automate that and able to give that at a scalable level, you'll then become very valuable to what we think will be the meta AI platforms for a number of use cases. And that's where you're seeing the investor appetite. That, and also if you look at APAC, there's 5 million people a year moving to an urbanized area. They've all signed up to a lot of policy and regulations around ESG commitments. I think 90% of Thai Philippine young people say that's a key component of what they want. So therefore, you've got to build all this housing for that many people moving from rural areas whilst sustaining ESG as well. So you're seeing in APAC, I would say, a broad commitment in terms of construction tech. And then on the US side, you're definitely seeing those that can generate good data sets that are seeing high value and high investment as a result.
It's interesting you mentioned a couple of sort of regional differences there, or kind of different focuses. What are you seeing international? I mean, what are the kind of common themes, and what are some other kind of perhaps more regional themes that are driving the kind of investment and the kind of adoption?
I think if you look at APAC, for example, APAC split into 3 tiers. So you've got Japan, Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand, and a couple of others I've not mentioned. And then you've got that second tier, Indonesia, India, and then the third tier is the kind of the ones that have still got a bit to grow. But if you look at someone like Indonesia, for example, and this is a bit niche, but their demand for air conditioning from the movement to the middle class of the number of people by 2050, the demand for air conditioning in Indonesia alone, that marginal change, will be greater than the electricity demand currently in Germany.
Oh.
So you think, and this is the challenge, is that you have ESG, and then you say, well, we've got this new middle class people in very robust populous places. And that's where, from a regional context, that's why there's a lot of focus on things where you can actually reduce emissions, such as construction, or how do we actually build these areas in a way that we can reduce our footprint, because you just have this massive swell of people making huge transformational change. So that, I hope that gives you a good insight.
It is. And what about perhaps a more developed area like Europe, where once again I know obviously the EU Commission is looking very hard at their net zero. What are you seeing in Europe, which I know, although people can see it as a monolithic market, clearly remains a very separate sort of checkerboarded market in terms of the different jurisdictions.
What you say is very true. Europe's very hard. Like the EIF, I think the funds 50% of all, I think, startups in Europe. So it's heavily backed by the EU. Where we're seeing a lot of tech, and you'd imagine this from mature areas, is consolidation. You're actually seeing good sized or significantly sized prop techs with M&A arms now, which is obviously something you didn't see 3-4 years ago. So you're seeing consolidation. You're also seeing a lot of investment in, they're further ahead probably in terms of how you repurpose some assets. So you're seeing short-term digital nomad rentals in the core cities, so that kind of branch off of that Airbnb style. You're seeing a lot of them do very well as people work remotely, so they might go to Paris for a week for work, but stay there for 45 days. Hotels are viable. So you're starting to see that repurposing start to happen. Champs-Élysées has already converted a number of office buildings into residential, so they're much more advanced in terms of some of the changes that are happening. But obviously a lot of that carries risk and cost.
And you talk there about the sort of those larger prop tech firms now. Can you give us a flavour of the prop tech firms that really have become truly international? Because it strikes many, I think, when you look at the landscape, that clearly as startups, that they often clearly start in their original domicile and try to go for growth there. But and once again, I suppose I use Europe of that example where it's never really built its own Google, has it, in that sense? So where would you highlight the real success stories of what you could really class as a truly global prop tech firm?
I mean, I guess the best ones, I think Matt said this the last time, is Procore or something like that. I think the challenges with real estate is that they require the arbitrage is in the local nuance in terms of where you build, where you sell, where you buy, and the prop techs obviously then feed that market. So to take something like a Zillow to Australia, or Square Yards from India to the UK, very good businesses, but because of that nuance and network that you need, it's very, very difficult. So I think we wouldn't call it companies per se, but I think something like software platforms in homogeneous areas of real estate like construction, that's probably where you'll see the most global companies.
Do you almost see a sense where one could end up with perhaps almost I don't know, in many investor circles, the sort of the concept of the conglomerate is not valued quite literally. That sense of perhaps people forming conglomerates of prop techs where they pick a best of breed in different jurisdictions and form that sort of scale and mass through that approach. Because as you say, you do end up with these nuances, these jurisdictional kind of effects that mean it's hard to kind of necessarily move it from country to country. Do you see that kind of potentially emerging?
For sure. I think, I mean, SPACs was obviously an attempt to that. PE will be interesting where it ends up, because we almost kind of saw the PE roll-ups as a quasi-asset class for real estate, because they were just looking at yield. If you have the middleware, the centers within a large portfolio, then you know that you're going to get a return. So whether that will continue, I think the real driver would probably be the agencies. But I think the challenge they may have is they're almost too big to actually have a cohesive thing to go across globally.
Indeed, and I guess a final question, talking about firms of scale, is do you feel that the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts of this world will become more involved? I mean, obviously they're quite often their web service offshoots are involved in Internet of Things in terms of that kind of level of the stack. Do you see an appetite for them to get perhaps more involved and invest in real estate as a line of business, a line of service for them?
Yeah, we actually met Google last year in California, and it was very interesting where they're going. I think they obviously pulled out Sidewalk Labs in Toronto, I think.
Toronto, yeah.
And but I think there's still for Amazon and Microsoft as well to enter the commercial space. Obviously, Amazon has Alexa. You've got other home tech things, but obviously that's probably an add-on to a service that's already done. You haven't really seen them move into that commercial space yet. I mean, Microsoft obviously has its ecosystems quite well mapped out and mapped to their networks or whatever, but no one's really targeted commercial yet. And I think that will be definitely a space to look at in the next 2 to 5 years.
Something to watch. Well, as ever, Stephen, it's been fascinating to chat and get your insight, and I look forward to catching up again. But for today, thanks ever so much for your time, and take care.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.